Colonel Rebecca Martinez looked like any other veteran in Seat 25C. Gray hair, simple clothes, quiet smile. When F-35 fighters escorted their emergency flight, everything changed. The pilots learned her identity over radio. Two of the world's most advanced fighter jets stood at attention. Legends never truly retire. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Colonel Rebecca Storm Martinez sat in Seat 25C of Delta Flight 2847, looking like any other middle-aged woman traveling from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. on a Tuesday morning. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a plain blue sweater, dark jeans, and comfortable walking shoes. The only hint of her military background was a small American flag pin on her jacket lapel. The flight attendant, Jessica, smiled politely as she offered Rebecca coffee. "Thank you for your service," she said, noticing the pin. It was something she said to dozens of veterans every week, a routine courtesy that had become automatic. "You're welcome," Rebecca replied quietly, accepting the coffee with a gentle smile. She had heard those words thousands of times in the past 5 years since retiring from the Air Force. Most people assumed she had been a nurse, an administrator, or maybe worked in military communications. Very few people looked at the soft-spoken woman in economy class and imagined her flying the most advanced fighter jet ever built. The passenger beside her, a businessman named Tom, struck up a friendly conversation. "So what branch did you serve in?" he asked, genuinely interested. "Air Force," Rebecca answered simply. "That's great. My brother was Army. Did you work on the planes or fly them?" Rebecca paused for just a moment. "I flew them," she said. Tom nodded approvingly. "Transport planes? That must have been exciting, traveling all over the world." "Something like that," Rebecca replied, not wanting to correct his assumption. She had learned that telling people she flew F-35 Lightning II fighters usually led to uncomfortable conversations or disbelief. It was easier to let them think what they wanted to think. What Tom didn't know was that the quiet woman in 25C had commanded the 388th Fighter Wing at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. She had flown over 200 combat missions in the most technologically advanced fighter aircraft ever created. Her call sign, Storm, came from her ability to appear out of nowhere and strike targets with devastating precision before vanishing back into the sky. 2 hours into the flight, everything changed in an instant. Flight 2847 was cruising at 37,000 feet over Kansas when the pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm but serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Williams. We're experiencing some technical difficulties and need to make an immediate descent. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, prepare for emergency procedures." Rebecca's training kicked in immediately. She recognized the controlled urgency in the captain's voice. This wasn't a minor problem. While other passengers looked around nervously or asked questions, Rebecca quietly observed the flight crew's movements and listened to the subtle changes in engine sound that most people wouldn't notice. The businessman beside her gripped his armrest. "What do you think is wrong?" he asked nervously. Rebecca listened carefully to the engines and felt the aircraft's movement. "Probably hydraulic system failure," she said calmly. "The pilots are handling it correctly." Tom stared at her. "How can you tell that?" "Experience," Rebecca replied simply. What she didn't explain was that she had experienced similar emergencies in aircraft far more complex than the Boeing 737 they were flying. She had landed damaged F-35s with multiple system failures while under enemy fire. This commercial emergency, while serious, was well within the capability of trained airline pilots to handle. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that this emergency was more complicated than a simple hydraulic failure. In the cockpit, Captain Williams and his first officer were dealing with multiple system failures that had developed simultaneously. Navigation systems were failing, communications were becoming unreliable, and they were flying through an area where commercial radar coverage was limited. "Denver Center, Delta 2847 declaring emergency," Captain Williams transmitted. "We have multiple system failures and are requesting immediate assistance." The response came quickly from Air Traffic Control. "Delta 2847, we copy your emergency. We're coordinating with military assets in your area to provide escort assistance." Within minutes, 2 F-35 Lightning II fighters from the 120th Fighter Squadron at Buckley Air Force Base in Colorado were scrambled to intercept and escort the troubled airliner. Major Jake Viper Thompson and Captain Lisa Hawk Chin climbed rapidly to meet the commercial flight. Denver Center, Falcon 1 and Falcon 2 airborne and climbing to intercept Delta 2847, Major Thompson transmitted. "Falcon flight, Delta 2847 is descending through flight level 250 with multiple system failures. Stand by for escort assignment. As the F-35s approached the airliner, they prepared to provide visual assistance and relay communications if the commercial aircraft's radios failed completely. It was a routine military support mission, something both pilots had done before. But this routine mission was about to become something extraordinary. As the F-35s took position alongside Delta Flight 2847, air traffic control began coordinating the emergency response. Part of that coordination involved checking the passenger manifest for any information that might be relevant to the emergency medical personnel, pilots, or anyone with specialized knowledge who might assist. Falcon 1 Denver Center, came the transmission. We're reviewing the passenger manifest for Delta 2847. We show a retired Air Force colonel aboard, Rebecca Martinez. Are you familiar with that name? Major Thompson nearly dropped his flight controls. Say again, Denver Center. Did you say Colonel Rebecca Martinez? Affirmative, Falcon 1. Retired Colonel Rebecca Martinez, passenger in seat 25C. In the cockpit of Falcon 2, Captain Chen's eyes went wide. Viper, did he just say Storm Martinez is on that plane? Major Thompson's voice was filled with awe. Hawk, if that's really Colonel Storm Martinez, we're escorting a living legend. Both F-35 pilots knew exactly who Rebecca Storm Martinez was, even though they had never met her personally. In the F-35 community, her name was spoken with the kind of reverence usually reserved for the founding fathers of aviation. She had been one of the first women to command an F-35 squadron. She had developed tactics that were still being taught at the Air Force Weapons School. She had flown missions that remained classified but were whispered about in ready rooms around the world. Denver Center, Falcon 1, Major Thompson transmitted. Can you confirm the identity of Colonel Martinez? Is she the former commander of the 388th Fighter Wing? There was a pause while air traffic control verified the information. Falcon 1 confirmed. Colonel Rebecca Martinez, former commander 388th Fighter Wing, call sign Storm. Retired 2020 after 28 years of service. Inside their F-35 cockpits, both pilots did something that had never been done before in the history of military aviation. Flying in formation at 25,000 feet, Major Thompson and Captain Chen came to attention in their ejection seats as a gesture of profound respect for the woman sitting quietly in seat 25C of the aircraft they were escorting. Ma'am, Major Thompson transmitted on the emergency frequency that the airliner was monitoring. This is Major Thompson, Falcon 1. Captain Chen and I want you to know it's an honor to provide escort for your flight. In the cockpit of Delta 2847, Captain Williams was confused by the transmission. Falcon 1, this is Delta 2847. I'm not sure I understand your message. Delta 2847, we understand you have Colonel Rebecca Martinez aboard your aircraft. Colonel Martinez is a legend in the F-35 community. We wanted to express our respect for her service. Captain Williams looked at his first officer with surprise. They had been so focused on the emergency that they hadn't paid attention to the passenger manifest. Falcon 1, are you saying we have a distinguished military officer aboard our flight? Affirmative, Delta 2847. Colonel Martinez was one of the most accomplished F-35 pilots in Air Force history. It's an honor to escort her aircraft. In the passenger cabin, Rebecca heard the radio exchange through the aircraft's communication system. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, knowing that her quiet anonymity was about to end. The businessman beside her was staring at her with a completely different expression than he had worn an hour earlier. Did they just say you commanded F-35 fighters? Tom asked in amazement. Yes, Rebecca replied simply. The F-35 Lightning? The most advanced fighter jet in the world. Yes. Tom looked around the cabin, where other passengers were beginning to realize that the quiet woman in 25C was not just any veteran. Ma'am, I had no idea. I'm sorry, I assumed you flew transport planes. Rebecca smiled gently. It's okay. Most people make that assumption. The flight attendant, Jessica, approached their row with a look of wonder on her face. Colonel Martinez? The pilots told us who you are. I'm so sorry I didn't recognize your service earlier. You treated me with respect and kindness, Rebecca replied. That's all any veteran wants. But the recognition was just beginning. Major Thompson's voice came over the aircraft's communication system again, this time addressing Rebecca directly. Colonel Martinez, this is Major Thompson in Falcon 1. Ma'am, I want you to know that your tactics manual is required reading in our squadron. The storm formation you developed saved my wingman's life over Syria last year. As word spread through the passenger cabin that they were flying with a legendary military pilot, Rebecca found herself surrounded by curious and respectful fellow travelers. But she remained focused on the emergency situation, using her experience to help keep other passengers calm. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, standing up in the aisle, "I'm Colonel Rebecca Martinez, retired Air Force. I want you to know that the pilots flying this aircraft are highly trained professionals, and the F-35 fighters escorting us are flown by some of the best pilots in the world. We're going to be fine." Her calm authority had an immediate effect on the nervous passengers. This wasn't just reassurance from a fellow traveler, this was professional assessment from someone who clearly knew what she was talking about. In the cockpit, Captain Williams made a decision that went against normal protocols. "Colonel Martinez, this is Captain Williams. Would you be willing to come to the cockpit? We could use your expertise in coordinating with the military escort." Rebecca made her way to the front of the aircraft, where the flight crew welcomed her with obvious respect. As she entered the cockpit, she immediately assessed the situation with the trained eye of someone who had dealt with aircraft emergencies in far more dangerous circumstances. "What systems are you seeing failures in?" she asked Captain Williams. "Navigation, some communication systems, and we're getting intermittent warnings from the flight management computer," he replied. Rebecca looked at the instrument panel with the kind of systematic analysis that came from years of flying the most complex aircraft ever built. "Have you tried switching to backup navigation systems?" "We have, but we're not getting consistent readings." "Captain Chin, this is Colonel Martinez," Rebecca transmitted to the F-35 pilots. "Can you provide GPS coordinates and heading information to assist with navigation?" "Yes, ma'am," came the immediate reply from Captain Chin. "It would be an honor to assist." What happened next demonstrated why Rebecca Storm Martinez had become a legend in military aviation. Using her knowledge of both civilian and military aircraft systems, she coordinated between the troubled airliner and the F-35 escorts in a way that turned a dangerous emergency into a controlled situation. "Falcon flight, I'm going to have Delta 2847 descend to flight level 180 and reduce speed to 250 knots, Rebecca transmitted. "That will give us better fuel efficiency and put us in a better position for approach to Denver International." "Roger, Colonel," Major Thompson replied. "We'll maintain escort position and provide navigation assistance." Rebecca then worked with Captain Williams to systematically troubleshoot the aircraft's problems. Her experience with advanced avionics systems in the F-35 gave her insights into electronic failures that even experienced airline pilots might not consider. "Try switching the flight management computer to manual mode and then back to automatic," she suggested. "Sometimes electronic interference can cause temporary failures that reset themselves." Captain Williams followed her suggestion, and several of the warning lights immediately cleared. "How did you know to try that?" he asked in amazement. "F-35s have some of the most complex electronic systems ever installed in an aircraft," Rebecca explained. "You learn to troubleshoot problems that aren't in any manual." As Delta Flight 2847 made its approach to Denver International Airport, the F-35 pilots continued to demonstrate their respect for Rebecca in ways that were unprecedented in military aviation. Major Thompson and Captain Chin maintained perfect escort formation, treating the commercial flight as if it were carrying the President of the United States. "Denver Tower, this is Falcon 1 requesting priority handling for Delta 2847, Major Thompson transmitted. "We have a distinguished Air Force veteran aboard who requires our highest level of support." Falcon 1 Denver Tower. Delta 2847 is cleared for priority approach runway 34 right. Emergency equipment is standing by. But Major Thompson wasn't finished. "Denver Tower, request permission for Falcon flight to perform a ceremonial flyby after Delta 2847 lands safely." Falcon 1, permission granted for ceremonial flyby. Rebecca heard the exchange and felt a deep emotion that she hadn't experienced in years. These young pilots, flying the same aircraft she had commanded, were honoring her service in a way that meant more than any medal or ceremony ever could. "Major Thompson, this is Colonel Martinez," she transmitted. "Your offer of a flyby is greatly appreciated, but not necessary." "Ma'am, with respect, it is necessary. You paved the way for all of us. Every F-35 pilot owes part of our success to the foundation you built." Delta Flight 2847 touched down at Denver International Airport without further incident. The aircraft's problems, while serious, had been manageable thanks to the coordination between the airline crew, the military escort, and Rebecca's expertise. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Passengers applauded not just for the safe landing, but in recognition of the remarkable woman who had helped ensure their safety. Rebecca remained characteristically modest, deflecting praise and insisting that the airline pilots deserved the credit. But outside the aircraft, something extraordinary was happening. As promised, the two F-35 Lightning II fighters performed a low, slow flyby of the airport, a ceremonial salute that is normally reserved for fallen heroes or the most distinguished veterans. Airport workers stopped what they were doing to watch the sleek fighters pass overhead. Other airline crews came out of their aircraft to witness the unusual tribute. Passengers from other flights pressed against terminal windows to see the military salute. Ladies and gentlemen, came the announcement over the airport's public address system. The F-35 Lightning II aircraft performing the flyby are honoring Colonel Rebecca Martinez, a distinguished Air Force veteran who assisted with today's emergency landing of Delta Flight 2847. As passengers disembarked from Flight 2847, word had already spread throughout Denver International Airport about the legendary pilot who had been sitting quietly in seat 25C. Airport security, airline personnel, and even passengers from other flights wanted to meet the woman whose service had earned such respect from active-duty military pilots. Rebecca found herself surrounded by well-wishers, but she remained focused on making sure all the passengers from her flight were safe and comfortable. She checked on elderly passengers, helped families with children, and made sure everyone knew where to find ground transportation. Tom, the businessman who had sat beside her, waited until the crowd thinned before approaching her. "Colonel Martinez, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your service based on ignorance." "You don't owe me anything," Rebecca replied. "Most veterans serve in support roles. Combat pilots are a small percentage of military personnel. Your assumptions were reasonable." "But that's exactly the point," Tom insisted. "I shouldn't have assumed anything. I should have asked about your service with the respect it deserved." Rebecca smiled. "The respect you showed was perfect. You thanked me for my service and treated me as an equal. That's all any veteran wants." An hour later, Major Thompson and Captain Chin arrived at the airport still wearing their flight suits. They had requested permission to meet Colonel Martinez in person, something that required special clearance and coordination between multiple military commands. When they found Rebecca in the airport's military family room, both pilots came to attention and saluted with a precision that reflected their deep respect for her service. "Ma'am, Major Jake Thompson, 120th Fighter Squadron," the senior pilot introduced himself. "Captain Lisa Chin, 120th Fighter Squadron," the second pilot added. Rebecca returned their salutes with the same precision, then extended her hand for handshakes. "Please call me Rebecca. We're all pilots here." "Ma'am, we can't do that," Major Thompson replied. "You're the Storm Martinez. You're the reason half of us are alive today." Rebecca looked puzzled. "I'm not sure I understand." Captain Chin explained, "Colonel, the tactics you develop for multi-threat environments are part of our basic training. The storm formation, the electronic warfare procedures, the way you integrated stealth technology with traditional air combat, it's all standard operating procedure now. More than that," Major Thompson added, "the leadership principles you established when you commanded the 388th are taught at the Air Force Academy. You didn't just fly missions, you changed how we think about what it means to be a fighter pilot." As the three pilots talked in the quiet of the military family room, Rebecca began to understand the full impact of her service in ways she had never considered. During her active duty career, she had been focused on the immediate challenges of commanding squadrons, flying missions, and developing new tactics. She had never thought about how her work would influence future generations of pilots. "When I was developing those tactics," she told the young pilots, "I was just trying to solve immediate problems. How do you coordinate multiple aircraft in complex threat environments? How do you use technology to gain advantages over enemies? I never thought about creating a legacy." "That's what makes it even more impressive," Captain Chin replied. "You weren't trying to be revolutionary. You were just trying to be effective. But effectiveness at your level becomes revolutionary." Major Thompson nodded in agreement. "Colonel, there are pilots flying F-35s today who are alive because they use tactics you developed. There are missions succeeding because they follow procedures you established. Your influence extends far beyond anything you might have realized." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what these young pilots were telling her. "What about you two? What are your stories?" Major Thompson and Captain Chin exchanged glances, then began sharing their own experiences as F-35 pilots. They talked about missions they had flown, challenges they had faced, and how Rebecca's innovations had helped them succeed in situations that might otherwise have been impossible. "The storm formation saved my life over Syria," Major Thompson explained. "We were outnumbered 3-1, but using your tactics, we were able to engage multiple threats simultaneously while maintaining stealth advantages." Captain Chin added her own perspective. "The leadership principles you established helped me when I was dealing with equipment failures over Afghanistan. Instead of panicking, I remembered your emphasis on systematic problem solving and communication with wingmen." As their conversation continued, Rebecca realized that she was seeing the future of military aviation. Major Thompson and Captain Chin represented a new generation of pilots who had grown up with technology that was still experimental during her active duty career. They flew aircraft that were more advanced than anything she had commanded, yet they still valued the fundamental principles of leadership, tactics, and airmanship that had defined her career. "What's the biggest challenge facing F-35 pilots today?" Rebecca asked. "Integration," Captain Chin replied immediately. "The aircraft is incredibly capable, but the real challenge is integrating with other aircraft, other services, and allied forces in complex operations." Major Thompson nodded. "The technology is amazing, but it's only as good as the pilots who use it and the teams that support it. That's why your leadership principles are still so important." Rebecca smiled. "That sounds familiar. When I was flying, we always said that the most advanced aircraft in the world is only as good as the person in the cockpit and the team on the ground." "Some things never change," Major Thompson agreed. "Technology evolves, but the fundamental principles of military aviation remain the same." As their meeting drew to a close, both young pilots asked Rebecca for advice about their own careers and the future of military aviation. "What would you do differently if you were starting your career today?" Captain Chin asked. Rebecca considered the question carefully. "I would focus even more on developing other pilots. The most important thing I did wasn't flying missions or developing tactics. It was mentoring young officers who went on to become leaders themselves. Like these two officers in front of me," she continued, looking at Thompson and Chin. "You're the future of military aviation. The tactics I develop will become obsolete as technology advances, but the principles of leadership, teamwork, and dedication to mission success will always be relevant." Major Thompson asked, "What do you see as the biggest challenge facing military aviation in the next decade?" "The same challenge we've always faced," Rebecca replied. "How do you maintain the human element in an increasingly technological environment? How do you develop pilots who can use advanced systems while still thinking creatively and making sound decisions under pressure? Technology should enhance human capability, not replace human judgment," she continued. "The most advanced aircraft in the world still needs a pilot who can think, adapt, and lead." As Major Thompson and Captain Chin prepared to return to their base, they asked Rebecca one final question that had been on their minds since they first learned her identity. "Colonel, why were you flying commercial and economy class?" Captain Chin asked. "Someone with your service record could have access to military transport or at least first-class accommodations." Rebecca laughed gently. "Because I'm a retired Air Force colonel, not a celebrity. I earned a pension, not a fortune. And honestly, I prefer traveling with regular people. It keeps me grounded. Besides," she added, "some of my best conversations have been with people who had no idea about my military background. Today, I learned about Tom's business, heard about Jessica's family, and met a dozen other passengers who had interesting stories to tell. If I had been in first class or on a military flight, I would have missed all of that." Major Thompson and Captain Chin exchanged looks of admiration. This was why Rebecca Martinez had become a legend, not just because of her flying skills or tactical innovations, but because she remained humble and connected to the people she had spent her career protecting. "Ma'am, it has been an honor to meet you," Major Thompson said as both pilots came to attention one final time. "The honor has been mine," Rebecca replied, returning their salute. "Fly safe and take care of each other." The next morning, Rebecca Martinez was back to being just another passenger on another commercial flight. She wore the same simple clothes, carried the same basic travel items, and sat in the same economy class seat she had purchased with her own money. The flight attendant on this new flight offered her coffee with the same polite, routine courtesy that flight attendants offer to thousands of veterans every day. "Thank you for your service," she said automatically. "You're welcome," Rebecca replied with the same gentle smile she had given the day before. The passenger beside her, a college student this time, struck up a friendly conversation. "So what did you do in the military?" she asked. "I was a pilot," Rebecca answered simply. "Cool. What kind of planes did you fly?" "Fighter jets," Rebecca replied. The student nodded politely, probably assuming Rebecca had flown older aircraft or training planes. She had no way of knowing that the quiet woman beside her had commanded the most advanced fighter squadron in the world, or that just 24 hours earlier active-duty F-35 pilots had stood at attention in their cockpits as a gesture of respect for her service. But Rebecca preferred it that way. The real measure of her success wasn't the recognition she received from other military pilots, it was the fact that she could sit anonymously in seat 25C, knowing that somewhere above the clouds, young pilots were flying missions using tactics she had developed, following leadership principles she had established, and carrying forward traditions she had helped create. 6 months after the emergency landing of Delta Flight 2847, Major Thompson and Captain Chin were assigned to a special training mission at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Their job was to help develop new tactics for F-35 operations in contested environments, exactly the kind of work that Rebecca Martinez had pioneered years earlier. As they prepared for their first training flight, Major Thompson found himself thinking about the quiet woman who had sat in seat 25C. Her influence on their mission was everywhere, in the planning procedures they used, in the communication protocols they followed, in the leadership principles that guided their decisions. "You know what I learned from meeting Colonel Martinez?" he said to Captain Chin as they walked to their aircraft. "What's that?" "The best leaders are the ones who don't need recognition." She was perfectly content to sit in economy class and be treated like any other veteran. But when the situation required her expertise, she stepped up without hesitation. Captain Chin nodded as she began her pre-flight inspection. And then she went right back to being a regular passenger. No ego, no demands for special treatment. Just a professional who did what needed to be done. As their F-35s climbed into the Nevada sky for another training mission, both pilots carried with them the lessons they had learned from Rebecca "Storm" Martinez. Not just the tactical innovations and leadership principles that had made her famous in military aviation circles, but the personal example of humility, professionalism, and quiet service that defined true military excellence. Somewhere below them, on commercial flights crossing the country, other veterans sat in economy class seats, traveling modestly and anonymously. Most of them had served in support roles, administrative positions, or other essential but unglamorous military jobs. But among them occasionally sat people like Rebecca Martinez, quiet heroes whose contributions to national defense were known only to those who had shared their profession and understood the magnitude of their achievements. The F-35 Lightning II fighters that Major Thompson and Captain Chin flew that day were testaments to American military technology and industrial capability. But the tactics they used, the procedures they followed, and the principles that guided their mission were testaments to something more fundamental: the dedication of people like Rebecca Martinez, who had spent their careers pushing the boundaries of what was possible while remaining grounded in the values that made their service meaningful. In seat 25C of a commercial airliner somewhere over the American heartland, a veteran sat quietly, reading a book and sipping coffee. The flight attendants treated her with routine courtesy. The passengers beside her made polite conversation about ordinary topics. And high above, unseen and unheard, F-35 pilots flew missions that built upon foundations laid by people exactly like her. The quiet heroes of military aviation continue their journeys, carrying their stories and their sacrifices in silence, content to know that their service made a difference even if the world never knows their names. Colonel Rebecca "Storm" Martinez, retired, economy class, seat 25C. Just another veteran traveling home. This story celebrates the quiet professionalism of military veterans who continue to serve others even after their official service has ended, and the respect that true excellence commands across generations of those who understand its value.